The wind howled like a hungry beast across the night-darkened waters as Captain Sable Galloway squinted at the ancient obsidian shard in her hand. By moonlight, it seemed to breathe, as though some trapped spirit within strained to escape. It was no ordinary map. It was rumored to be a key to Atlantis itself, the fabled city beneath the waves, drowning in secrets and untold riches. The shard's slick surface bore shifting engravings, etched deep with symbols she barely recognized, though her eyes caught hints of gold in the black glass. It called to her, whispering of treasure, of eternal glory, of power no pirate could resist. Around her, her crew shifted uneasily on the deck of the Serpent's sting. They were no strangers to danger, yet tonight, a feeling of dread hung as thick as the salt in the air. Rumors said the city was protected by a dark magic, a curse waiting to trap any who dared disturb its rest. But Sable, with her storm-gray eyes and unbreakable will, dismissed the tales as superstition. "Treasure's only cursed if you believe in curses," she'd said, a hard edge to her voice while the crew's murmurs quieted. Some looking away, others clutching amulets for protection. "Lend ho!" came the cry from the crow's nest, and in the distance the twisted peaks of the Devil's Teeth reefs rose out of the water, sharp as the jaws of a great beast. The crew exchanged glances, shifting with nervous energy. Here, at the edge of the map's destination, their blood raced hot with fear and excitement. The Devil's Teeth, an ill omen in themselves. But beyond lay the valley they sought, where the Temple of Atlantis was rumored to slumber, holding treasures that had driven many before them to madness. Before we set sail, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And if you were part of this crew, what role would you take on? The navigator, the lookout. Let's see who's brave enough to join this adventure. As the ship skimmed through the waves, Sable sensed the tension rising. They sailed into a patch of water where no wind blew, a sudden stillness falling over them like a shroud. The ship slowed, and even the waves seemed to pull away, leaving them in a dead silence that pressed against their skin. Sable's first mate, Mara, a wiry woman with scars crisscrossing her arms, muttered under her breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Captain," Mara said, her voice low. "This place, there's something wrong here. Feels like we're being watched." Sable smirked, casting a quick glance at the restless crew. "Watching is all they'll be doing. The treasure's close and we ain't turning back now." At her words, a distant roar rumbled from the depths below, as if the very earth had stirred to her defiance. Without warning, the ship jolted violently, nearly throwing Sable off her feet. A whirlpool opened ahead, churning in hungry spirals, threatening to drag the ship to its doom. The crew scrambled, shouts mixing with the roar of the water. "Hold steady!" Sable's voice cut through the chaos, fierce as lightning, and the crew heeded her command, fighting the ropes and sails as the Serpent's sting was pulled toward the spiraling abyss. She held the shard tight in her hand, as if its power alone could steady the ship, but even her iron grip could not keep her mind from racing. Was this the curse the legends warned of? The whirlpool relented just as they reached the edge of the reef, and the ship lurched forward, escaping the pull with a final shudder. All around them, the fog lifted like a curtain, revealing a strange, glowing entrance in the rocky cliff, a gaping maw leading down into darkness. The Temple of Atlantis lay below. Sable took a breath, a glint of fire in her eyes. She turned to her crew. "We descend at dawn," she commanded. "Gather your courage and your wits. Only fools fear stories, and we're no fools." But in the back of her mind, Sable knew this was no ordinary treasure hunt. The obsidian shard pulsed in her hand as if alive, and for the first time she wondered what forces she might unleash by daring to disturb Atlantis. Still, there was no room for hesitation. She'd come too far to turn back. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the jagged rocks, Sable led her crew to the hidden passage carved into the cliffside. Lanterns in hand, they descended a staircase slick with moisture and covered in eerie bioluminescent moss that glowed faintly beneath their feet. The air grew heavy, pressing against their lungs with each step. The deeper they went, the more Sable sensed a dark power in the walls around them, a force that was waking up, watching them with unseen eyes. They finally entered a cavernous chamber, the heart of the temple, where massive stone statues loomed in the shadows. frozen mid-movement, as if guarding something. The place had an unnatural stillness, the quiet amplifying each footstep, every creak of leather and clink of metal. At the far end of the chamber sat a towering altar bathed in an unnatural glow, and there, pulsing with an unholy blue light, was the famed Heart of Atlantis, a gemstone larger than a man's fist, radiating a power so intense it seemed to pull the air toward it. The crew's eyes widened, their hands itching to reach out, greed and awe mirrored in their faces. Sable approached, her eyes locked on the heart, her fingers curling in anticipation. But as she reached out, a low rumble echoed from the walls, and the statues seemed to tremble as if stirring from a centuries-old sleep. The treasure they sought was real, yes, but it was guarded by something far older and far more dangerous than anything they'd ever faced. Without warning, the ground quaked, cracks spidering out from beneath the altar as the temple awakened to the presence of intruders. A sense of dread filled the chamber, thick as tar. The first warning had been subtle, but this time the temple roared, a demand for its guardians to rise and protect its sacred heart. The silence thickened, like the deep sea pressing against their skin, as Sable and her crew stood in the cavernous heart of Atlantis. The eerie blue glow of the Heart of Atlantis pulsed, casting strange shadows on the stone walls, as if unseen shapes shifted within the ancient carvings. They'd reached the treasure they had dreamed of, but every instinct screamed that something in the temple was watching, waiting. "Captain, perhaps we should leave," whispered Rig, the ship's gunner, his voice edged with fear. Rig was a stout man, covered in scars, his fingers twitching toward his pistol as he cast anxious glances at the unmoving statues surrounding them. But Sable's gaze remained locked on the Heart of Atlantis, the brilliant blue gem that pulsed with its own heartbeat, as though aware of the crew's presence. Her hand inched closer, the power emanating from the stone drawing her in. It was not just treasure. It was a promise of unmatched power, of immortality. Everything a captain could dream of and more. This was no ordinary treasure. It was a prize for the ages, and Sable's resolve hardened. "We've come too far to back down now, Rig," she said, her voice as steely as the sword strapped to her side. "This treasure's ours for the taking." As her fingers brushed the heart, the ground beneath them rumbled, a deep resonant sound that reverberated through the temple. The statues shuddered, then began to move, the stone guardian's eyes flickering with that same eerie blue light. The crew stumbled back, panic flashing in their eyes as the statues advanced, raising stone weapons that glinted with an unnatural sharpness. "Captain!" shouted Mara, drawing her cutlass, eyes wild with a mix of fear and defiance. "They're coming to life!" Sable's heart raced, but she held her ground. "Hold fast!" she barked, rallying her crew. "Stand your ground, fight like pirates. This treasure is ours and no statue's gonna stand in our way." The crew braced themselves, weapons drawn as the statues closed in, their steps heavy and unyielding. Sable swung her sword at the nearest figure, the steel ringing as it struck solid stone, barely leaving a mark. Around her, her crew slashed and shot, but it was as if the stone guardians could not be hurt. The statues moved methodically, their eyes blazing with the same eerie light as the Heart of Atlantis, their movements cold, relentless, and utterly silent. One of the statues lashed out, its stone blade striking down Hardtack, the oldest sailor on Sable's crew, with deadly precision. He fell with a strangled gasp, and in that moment Sable saw the life drain from his eyes. It was a sight that stirred something dark within her, a burning realization that this was no mere treasure hunt. They were trespassers in a place that had been sealed off for a reason, and the temple would demand a price. "Fall back," Sable shouted, desperation threading her voice. "Retreat to the passage, now!" But as the crew began to flee, the temple's corridors twisted around them, the once clear paths turning to endless spirals, each way forward winding back upon itself. It was as if the temple itself sought to trap them, reshaping its walls to prevent escape. Each turn led them deeper, even as the walls began to pulse with the same ominous blue light, casting ghostly shadows that flickered along the walls. They stumbled into a narrower chamber, its walls lined with smaller statues that, thankfully, remained frozen. Sable could feel the weight of fear pressing on her crew, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they glanced about, looking for any sign of escape. "What now, Captain?" Mara demanded, her voice a blend of fury and panic. "We're trapped here, leading ourselves to ruin." Sable met her gaze, defiance sparking in her eyes. "This temple thinks it can scare us off, but I've faced worse than stone shadows and shifting walls," she growled. "We move forward. There's always a way out. Find it." The crew hesitated, but Sable's fierce resolve rekindled a spark of courage in them. They pressed on, the corridors seemingly narrowing around them, the distant sound of stone grinding against stone haunting their every step. The further they went, the more the air thickened, the feeling of unseen eyes growing with every step they took deeper into the cursed halls. They finally emerged into a second vast chamber, a sanctuary filled with treasures of all kinds. Gold coins, gemstones, artifacts of ancient make. It should have been a sight of victory, yet the room felt wrong, oppressive, as if each piece of treasure harbored some hidden malice. "Keep your guard up," Sable ordered, her voice low. "Touch nothing until I say so." As her words echoed, the faint sound of laughter drifted from the shadows, soft at first, then growing louder, filling the room with a chilling mirth. Out from the darkness stepped a ghostly figure, dressed in ancient robes, his eyes hollow pits that glowed with the same blue fire. "Foolish mortals," the spirit intoned, his voice a cold whisper that snaked through the room. "Do you think you can simply walk away with the riches of Atlantis? This place has swallowed better than you. Kingdoms, conquerors, and warriors who sought what you now covet. All who entered left their souls behind." The crew shrank back, the bravado that had kept them fighting now fading into sheer terror. Sable alone stood firm, her gaze fixed on the specter. "Who are you to judge us?" she spat, her words a challenge. "We're pirates, we take what we will. If Atlantis thinks it can trap us, it's mistaken." The spirit merely chuckled, a sound that cut through the crew's courage like a dagger. "It is not Atlantis that will trap you, mortal. It is your own greed. Every treasure in this room is cursed. For each piece taken, you pay with a piece of yourself." Despite the warning, some of the crew, driven by fear and the greed that still clawed at their hearts, made a desperate grab for the nearest gold and jewels, their minds swayed by the treasures glinting in the faint blue light. The moment their hands touched the cursed riches, their bodies began to change, their skin taking on a dull, stone-like texture as their faces contorted in horror. Sable watched, horror mixing with rage as her crew members turned to stone one by one, their bodies petrifying as if they'd become part of the temple itself. The spirit's hollow laughter echoed around them. "Behold the price of defiance," the spirit sneered. "Atlantis demands its due." With the remaining few members of her crew, Sable retreated from the chamber, her heart pounding as she dragged Mara and Rig back toward the main passage, desperation now overcoming even her iron will. She could feel the spirit's laughter trailing after them, the sense that they were being hunted. But even as they stumbled back toward the entrance, they found their path blocked by one of the cursed guardians, its eyes blazing with the same merciless light. Sable's hand tightened around her sword, fury igniting within her. "We're not finished yet," she muttered, glancing at the few remaining crew members, their faces pale but determined. "If Atlantis wants a fight, we'll give it one it'll remember." And so, with one final cry, Sable led the last of her crew into battle, knowing their only hope was to break through or perish in the attempt. The roar of battle filled the temple, as Sable and her dwindling crew threw themselves against the relentless stone guardians. Every strike of metal on rock sent sparks flying, but it was like striking the cliffside itself. The guardians seemed endless, each one hewn from the very bones of the temple, unyielding and merciless. Yet Sable's voice rang out above the din, urging her crew onward. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation, each pirate knowing they were fighting not only for treasure, but for survival. But something shifted in the air, a sudden chilling silence falling over the chamber. The blue glow that pulsed from the heart of Atlantis brightened, filling the room with an almost blinding light. Sable froze, her gaze snapping toward the altar where the heart lay. Realizing too late that they had stirred something beyond their understanding, the heart lifted off its pedestal, hovering in the air, radiating an unnatural energy that thrummed like a heartbeat. From its center, spectral tendrils of light began to unfurl, creeping outward like a spider's web, touching the walls and the statues. Each tendril that connected to a guardian sent a surge of power through the stone, reanimating those that had fallen and bolstering the ones still standing. The temple itself was alive, and it was feeding on the heart's dark energy. "Captain!" Mara shouted, dodging the swing of a reanimated guardian. "This isn't just a cursed place. It's a trap set to claim every soul that enters." Sable clenched her jaw, fury and defiance blazing in her eyes. "Then we'll break the trap." She charged forward, her gaze locked on the heart.
Hey there! Quick message. Grab a paper, write down. You Pirate. Our channel name. Come back soon. We've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
It was clear now that the gem was the source of the curse, the keystone that connected the temple's magic. If they could destroy it, maybe, just maybe, they could break free. She motioned to Rig and Mara. "Cover me, I'm going for the heart." With grim determination, they forced their way through the guardians, creating a path toward the altar. Each step was a struggle as statues loomed from the shadows, their movements jerky yet terrifyingly fast. One nearly struck Mara down, its blade grazing her arm, but she snarled and retaliated, burying her dagger into the stone's crack and wrenching it apart. Rig covered Sable's back, firing his pistol at close range, though each bullet only chipped the surface of the stone creatures. But the slight delay was enough for Sable to reach the altar. She scrambled up, her hands grasping the hovering heart, the cold gem seeming to pulse beneath her fingers. The energy seared her skin, filling her with an intense, otherworldly pain, as if the stone itself sought to root itself in her soul. But Sable gritted her teeth, refusing to let go. With a cry, she raised the heart above her head, intending to smash it down on the stone pedestal. But before she could strike, a blinding light burst from the heart, illuminating the chamber. The ghostly figure of the temple's guardian, the specter they had encountered earlier, materialized before her, his hollow gaze fixed on her with something like pity. "Captain Galloway," he intoned, his voice a mournful whisper, "you have sealed your fate by touching the heart. It binds to the one who seeks to possess it. There is no escape from Atlantis, for its curse now flows through you." Sable's heart hammered, but she met the specter's gaze unflinchingly. "If I'm bound to this cursed place, then let it bind to the sea, where it belongs." Ignoring the spirit's warning, she brought the heart crashing down against the stone. The impact cracked the gem, releasing an ear-splitting scream that echoed throughout the temple. The blue light intensified, then shattered as an explosion of energy tore through the chamber. The stone guardians faltered, some collapsing as the curse momentarily weakened. But the victory was short-lived. The broken shards of the heart began to spin in mid-air, drawn together as if by a magnet, each piece seeking to reunite and restore its terrible power. Mara and Rig, gasping and covered in cuts and bruises, scrambled up to Sable's side. "Captain, it's rebuilding itself," Mara cried, panic lacing her words. "We have to go, now!" But the temple's defenses were reawakening with renewed vengeance. The walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering with a rumble that shook the ground beneath their feet. The remaining statues, reanimated by the heart's dark magic, surged forward, blocking the path back to the entrance. "There's no way out!" Rig shouted, firing wildly at an advancing guardian. Sable's mind raced. The heart was reforming, and with it, the curse that bound the temple's defenses to her very soul. But as she watched the swirling shards, a desperate idea took root. If she couldn't destroy the heart, perhaps she could wield it, turn its power against the very place that housed it. Ignoring her own fear, she reached out and seized the largest shard, pressing it against her chest. The shard burned with a searing cold, sending an icy tendril of pain through her body. She could feel it sinking into her, fusing with her spirit, as if it was both a weapon and a prison, but she grit her teeth, holding on to her defiance. In that moment, the heart responded. Power surged through her, and as her gaze hardened, the guardians froze mid-stride, bound to her will. She extended her arm, and the nearest guardian shattered into dust with a flick of her hand. But the power came at a cost. Each heartbeat sent the curse deeper into her, binding her more to the temple. She could feel her own life force draining, a steady flow that would leave her a hollow shell if she didn't escape soon. But there was no time to worry. "Run!" she commanded her crew, her voice echoing with the force of the heart. "I'll hold the statues back." Mara and Rig hesitated, but one look at their captain's eyes, now glowing faintly blue, told them that she was willing to sacrifice herself to see them escape. With a mixture of grief and determination, they fled toward the entrance, weaving between frozen guardians and collapsing stone. The temple quaked, sensing its captive was trying to leave. The very walls of the temple closed around Sable, who remained at the center, wielding the heart's cursed power, using it to shatter the guardians that sought to block her crew's path. Each use of the heart's magic left her weaker, the energy eating away at her as it fed on her defiance. Just as Mara and Rig neared the tunnel's entrance, a deafening crack split the air. The heart, now half-merged with Sable, pulsed wildly, threatening to consume her entirely. She could feel herself fading, her vision narrowing as the temple pulled her in. But her determination flared one last time. With a final scream of defiance, Sable threw the heart toward the temple's foundation, watching it sink into the stone as it detonated in a burst of light. The force shattered the heart's remnants, triggering a cascade of destruction throughout the temple. Sable collapsed, watching as the temple walls cracked and crumbled. She'd broken the heart, shattered its control, but the price was her own life force draining into the ruins of Atlantis. Her vision faded as she saw Mara and Rig, silhouetted against the blinding light, escaping the collapsing temple. As the last stones fell, Atlantis claimed its due, taking Sable's spirit into its cursed depths. Her sacrifice had freed her crew, but the legend of Atlantis would live on. The shattered remnants of the heart, still buried within the ruins, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to seek its power. The roar of collapsing stone echoed behind Mara and Rig as they staggered out of the temple, gasping for breath, their bodies bruised and their minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. As they reached the open air, dawn broke on the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the still waters. Behind them, the once proud Temple of Atlantis sank into the depths, claimed by the ocean once more, as if it had never existed at all. All that remained of the cursed city was the haunting silence of the waves. They collapsed onto the rocky outcropping that overlooked the churning sea, watching as the temple's last stones were swallowed by the water. Neither spoke, the weight of loss heavy upon them. Captain Sable Galloway was gone, her final moments seared into their memories. A fierce leader who'd stared down an ancient curse and, in the end, sacrificed herself to break its grasp on her crew. Rig clenched his fist, his gaze fixed on the swirling waters where the temple had vanished. "She fought harder than any of us," he murmured, his voice rough. "Atlantis couldn't break her spirit." Mara nodded, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion and grief. "Aye, she beat it at its own game. But she paid a price none of us can repay." They sat in silence, letting the dawn's golden light wash over them, feeling the weight of Sable's sacrifice settle into their hearts. Though they had escaped the temple, something lingered in the air, a reminder of the curse's unyielding presence. It was as if the heart of Atlantis, shattered yet still powerful, watched them from the depths, waiting for the day it would lure new souls into its clutches. After a time, Mara stood, squaring her shoulders. "Come on, Rig," she said, determination hardening her gaze. "Sable may be gone, but her legacy ain't. She wanted us to survive, and that's what we'll do. We'll carry her name, her legend, everything she fought for." Rig nodded, rising with a grim smile. "She'd have never let us wallow here like beaten dogs. The Serpent's sting needs a crew, and the seas ain't gonna sail themselves." Together, they navigated back to the ship, the two of them guiding the remnants of Sable's crew who'd waited, wary and shaken, on the edges of the Devil's Teeth reefs. The crew looked on, their expressions a mix of relief and sorrow as they scanned for Sable, hoping against hope that their captain would be among the survivors. But Mara's somber nod and the haunted look in her eyes told them everything. She didn't make it?" one of the younger deckhands asked, his voice wavering. Mara shook her head. "She faced down Atlantis and gave us our freedom. Her last command was that we live to carry her spirit and keep her memory alive." A heavy silence fell over the crew as they took in the loss of their captain. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet lap of waves against the hull. a mournful echo of Sable's final sacrifice. But Mara was not one to let sorrow anchor her. "Raise the colors," she commanded, her voice carrying a strength that lifted the crew's spirits. "We may have lost our captain, but we carry her with us. This ship will sail in her name, and every treasure we claim will be in honor of Captain Sable Galloway." The crew rallied to her call, their grief transformed into resolve. The Serpent's sting flew its flag high, its tattered sails catching the wind as they turned away from the Devil's Teeth, leaving behind the haunted waters and their fallen captain's legacy. They knew they would tell the story of the Heart of Atlantis, of the cursed city that had claimed countless lives, and of the fearless captain who had defied it, sacrificing herself so her crew could live. Days later, as they sailed under clear skies, Mara found herself alone at the helm, her gaze fixed on the horizon. In the quiet of the early morning, with only the sound of waves and the cry of seabirds, she swore an oath to Sable's memory, vowing to honor the fierce, unbreakable spirit that had guided them. But as the sun rose higher, a strange shimmer caught her eye on the deck. She glanced down, heart racing as she saw it. A small, sharp fragment of obsidian, a piece of the Heart of Atlantis. It glinted in the sunlight, radiating a faint blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. As if waiting, calling, a shiver ran down Mara's spine. She hesitated, reaching for the shard, but the memory of Sable's defiance, her last act of sacrifice, stopped her. She drew back, wrapping the shard in cloth, hiding it away in the depths of her cabin. She didn't know if the curse still lingered, if the fragment of the heart would ever truly be free of its dark magic. But one thing was certain: Atlantis was not done with them. As the Serpent's sting sailed into the vast expanse of open sea, Mara felt a new purpose settle within her. They had survived the cursed temple, escaped its deadly grip, yet they would carry its memory and its warnings with them, bound forever to the legend of Atlantis. Sable's sacrifice had given them a future, but it had also left them with a haunting reminder of the ancient, unforgiving power lurking beneath the waves. For there were tales yet to be told, curses still to be broken, and treasures still to be claimed. And though Sable's fate would remain a whispered legend among pirates and seafarers alike, the legacy of the Serpent's sting would live on, a symbol of defiance against the darkest depths of the sea. If you've braved the seas alongside Captain Galloway and her crew, subscribe to You Pirate for more legends and cursed treasures waiting to be discovered. Share this story with a friend, if they dare to join the next high-stakes journey into the unknown.